Okay, so we're here to talk about PCOS, which is polycystic ovary syndrome. We received a number of questions from our community about this, and since it's also PCOS Awareness Month, we thought it would be a great time to get together and talk about it. So one of the first questions we got, Mel, was what is PCOS and what's involved with it?
As you said, it's polycystic ovarian syndrome, but it's not just about having cysts on ovaries, which can kind of give that, you can get that wrong thought in your mind that if I have cysts on my ovaries, I have PCOS. It's not about the ovarian cyst. It's actually the root cause of PCOS is an androgen excess. So there's a hormone imbalance where the androgen hormones are too high, and so the other primary menstrual cycle hormones are not in balance, and this can, in most cases, mean delayed ovulation and long irregular cycles. So it's not just about the condition of a woman's ovaries, it's also important that she has the right sort of hormone testing to properly diagnose the condition. But the way that it comes out normally is often in long irregular cycles for most women.
Mm-hmm. And that's usually the most obvious sign, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And we're not just talking about irregular periods, we're actually talking about irregular ovulation, because we could potentially be bleeding and not necessarily pick up the fact that we do have PCOS, because we could assume that that was a period and then find out by tracking our cycle and tracking our ovulation that it wasn't really a period, it was breakthrough bleeding, and actually our ovulation is very irregular. So that's one of the first things we can.
Yes, and as in addition to that, if you are someone who just has long irregular cycles, or lots of length between ovulation events, that doesn't necessarily mean you have PCOS either, because there can be other causes. So that's where it's about the proper diagnosis, really ruling out all the other causes, getting the right hormone testing, not relying solely on ultrasound of the ovaries to properly diagnose the condition.
Yeah, definitely. And we actually have a guide that's available on our website about how to detect PCOS, but also to get the right diagnosis, the types of questions to ask your doctor, how to effectively work with your doctor, and also how to use BBT tracking as well to support that diagnosis. So we'll link to that in the notes, so you can access that and download it free of charge. So we also had some very specific questions from our community as well. They were very specific dietary questions. So I'll share them with you. I know it's difficult to answer them specifically, but I'll share what the type of things that are being asked. So one of the questions was about drinking milk, or eating dairy and then eating apples every day. And she's been diagnosed with PCOS. Is it something she should stop?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, obviously we can't give specific dietary advice, and that's something you need to go to your healthcare provider for. But if you have dietary intolerances, such as with dairy, for example, that's probably a big one. Then obviously that's going to add to inflammation. It can also add to other conditions of the body, and add to the endocrine disrupting portion of PCOS. So it's just something that each individual woman would need to seek further guidance on. Don't make extreme diet changes without the evidence that this is actually something that's affecting you.
And I think that applies whether you have PCOS or not. If you have an intolerance to a certain food, then obviously you wouldn't want to have that in an excessive amount. But also, if you're not sure about something, then you can check with your practitioner or vet to understand, is this affecting me in a negative way? But making those extreme changes could be detrimental as well. So
in regards to dietary changes, it's also important to figure out what type of PCOS you have, because if you have insulin resistant PCOS, which is a specific type, then obviously you're going to need to make changes to reduce the insulin load, like reduce that effect on your body. It's pumping out too much insulin and your body's resistant to that. So yeah, getting the correct diagnosis is really the key to figuring out where to make changes when it comes to diet.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. Yeah, because there are 4 types of PCOS, so it's important to know which one. Okay, so along similar lines, is it PCOS that makes me tired? And then she talks specifically about her exercises. So she walks around 10,000 steps a day, which is great. Is it enough for me, or should I do exercises? Again, we go back to this. Everybody's different. Everybody, whether you have PCOS or not, is different. We all have different bodily requirements. What's enough for one person might not be enough for another person.
That's right. The question about being tired, most definitely PCOS can contribute to tiredness, because it's your endocrine system, which also affects your thyroid, it affects so many other hormones, is not functioning ideally. So, all that can certainly have an effect on tiredness as well. So it can be a symptom for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. And then the 4th question we had is about discharge throughout your cycle. Is this normal with PCOS?
Yes, often with PCOS and long irregular cycles, no matter what the cause, our body will be going through multiple attempts at ovulation. And a part of attempting to ovulate or getting ready for ovulation is an increase in estrogen, because you're growing a follicle, maybe multiple follicles, and those then produce estrogen, which then produce cervical mucus. So to see lots of patches and ongoing cervical mucus throughout the cycle with PCOS is not unusual, because often the body is doing its best to ovulate, but you don't quite get there, and you're under that high estrogenic load for longer periods of time than in a regular cycle or someone with balanced hormones. If our hormones are working well and the ovulatory process is working well, we should only see cervical mucus for around about a week. But if that's not working well and the body's struggling a bit, then it can mean that we have a lot more cervical mucus throughout the cycle.
And I think that really shows how important it is to track not just our cervical mucus patterns, but also to track our basal body temperature as well, because then we know that, okay, my body's attempted to ovulate, but then with your temperatures you can confirm, yes, it has ovulated, and now I'm in my luteal phase and I'm going to get my period in X amount of days. I think that's it really shows the importance of tracking the two, not just for PCOS, but for everyone. Because we have odd cycles which might be a little bit irregular. So this also plays into why luteinizing hormone testing, LH testing, or OPK testing can be particularly tricky for somebody with PCOS as well. In actual fact, it can kind of add a level of confusion if you're having irregular cycles. And again, why it's so important for us to track PPT. And maybe you could expand on that a little bit, Mel, and talk about how the two play together, basically.
Yeah, so some types of PCOS, and probably the more common types, mean that a woman has higher amounts of LH or luteinizing hormone. She's producing more luteinizing hormone than a typical regular cycle, for example. So if she's using OPKs or those urine test sticks, she may get multiple positives across either many days, or then again those patches, like, okay, I got a positive LH today, and then in a week I got another one, and in another week I got another one. And again, it's all about the fact that the body is attempting to ovulate. It's trying to send those signals to release that egg, but those ovulation attempts may be failing multiple times. So the same as cervical mucus, as we talked about, high LH is a common symptom of PCOS. And again, it doesn't mean you can't use those test strips, but you may not be able to rely on them to be able to confirm ovulation. And if you add your temperatures with them, if you are going to use them, at least that will help you confirm, was this ovulation attempt successful?
So if we suspect we have PCOS, or maybe we've been diagnosed with PCOS, why is it so important that we keep tracking and establish this data? Like, how can this actually have a benefit for us?
Because if you're suffering or experiencing long irregular cycles and you're not tracking any of your fertility symptoms or not charting, not tracking ovulation, it's going to end up leaving you quite confused. And if you're in the case you're trying to conceive, you have no idea where your fertile window is. You have no idea when you've ovulated. And if you're just trying to go off the calendar and go, oh, I should have got my period by now, it can lead to confusion, it can lead to distress. You're testing for pregnancy when you haven't even ovulated yet. So at least by tracking, as much as it might become a little bit frustrating because you're not seeing ovulation over a long period of time, you've got the data. And then if you're seeking help from a healthcare provider, you've got the data. You can go, look, I know I've not ovulated on a regular basis. You can target your hormone testing better. It's just going to give you so much more information to be able to, treat the condition, find the core issue, treat it, and then when you make changes, you will see that reflected in your chart. So you'll be able to see, is this helping me ovulate more regularly? Are things looking better for me? Or conversely, is it looking worse? So at least you've got this way of understanding yourself at home, what's going on, and you're not left in the dark.
Gives you that baseline essentially to make improvements, and it is a long process. It's not necessarily going to be an overnight, we make one change and everything's great again. And so that from that perspective, it can be frustrating, but having that knowledge can also give you so much empowerment and make you feel that, okay, I can advocate for my own health, and I can go to my doctor and have this educated conversation with them about what I'm seeing in my chart. And of course, the Temp Drop team have a great community as well of fellow charters, as well as clinicians and practitioners that are there on hand to help advise and guide you through the process as well.
Yeah, you can get some support as well. You're not just all alone. There's other women out there as well going through this.
Exactly.
That's
going through exactly the same thing.
Yeah, that's a nice thing about the
Temp
Drop community, as you mentioned. You can have that.
Exactly. Okay, great. So just as a reminder, we'll post the information about the PCOS resources that are free for you to access and download at any time. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments as well.
Thanks,
Matt.